Sometimes I'll get a little agitated and I'll just look at my wife and go, well, what do you want from me? I've got brain damage. Yeah.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Neurolutions. Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 71 of the Strokecast. This is the biggest episode yet. And by big, I mean I actually have 4 guests on the show. We have Peter and Rhea Evans on the show again, and they are joined by Malia and Carrie Wilkinson. And it is Carrie's first appearance on the show, and he does great. You can find links to Peter, Rhea, and Malia's previous episodes in the show notes and over at strokecast.com/wherearewenow. Carrie Wilkinson had a hemorrhagic stroke 5 years ago in 2014. Malia, his wife, became his primary caregiver and aggressively drove his recovery, ensuring he got the medical support he needed. She's been sharing her insights in blog posts over on the Strokecast website. Peter Evans had his stroke in the fall of 2017. Rhea, his wife, became his primary caregiver, and together they navigated the new emotional landscape of post-stroke life. They've candidly shared their story of mental health and emotional struggles with us in prior episodes and blog posts. And of course, there's me. Now 2 years post-stroke, today, yes, today, June 3rd, is my second stroke anniversary. What happens when you put all 5 of us on the same call? Well, let's find out. Welcome, everyone, to the largest episode ever of the Strokecast. For those listening, we have 5 people on the line right now. You know, obviously me. We also have Peter and Rhea Evans joining us again.
Howdy.
Hello.
And Malia is joining us again, and this time joined by her husband, Carrie. So, welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Hey, Carrie.
So, we wanted to get everybody together because what happens in stroke recovery is that it is so different day by day, week by week, month by month, and year by year. And, you know, as you talk with survivors right out of the hospital or, you know, 5 years after their strokes or even 10 or 20 years after their strokes, you know, their attitude and their recovery has changed so much, and even the technology available has changed so much over the last 20 years and continues to change on a rapid basis. So having a stroke in 2014 is going to put you at a very different point in life and in recovery versus 2017 versus folks who may be having them today. So I guess what I want to start by asking is sort of where, you know, how do you see your recovery today relative to when you first had your stroke? And let's go ahead and start with Carrie.
That is a big question. I would say mentally I'm much further along. Physically, I'm not as far ahead as I have gotten mentally. Like after my stroke, after I got out of the hospital, I couldn't use a keyboard. Anything mental was like that was very difficult for me. But I was pretty good about exercising a lot. And then I kind of reached a plateau where I kind of lost my drive on the exercising so much. But I've been keeping the mental stuff going. And I listen to a lot of Audible books and do technical hobbies like 3D printing and stuff. So I think stretching myself mentally has helped me out a lot. I'm more aware of things going on around me and more involved. So it's weird to think that doing 3D printing might help my social interactions, but it does. It's kind of clearing out the neural pathways for everything.
That's great. And that makes a lot of sense as, we start focusing on something and trying harder and working on it. Plus, one of the things I've learned about 3D printing is that it really is also part of the broader maker community of people who are looking at technology as new ways to make things, everything from toys to little replacement parts to inventions. And there's a vibrant community of folks out there who are involved with that. And sounds like it's a great way to also open up to communicating online or even in person and sharing some of these experiences.
Yes. I've had people come over and work with me on 3D printing, and I get online. Unfortunately, I talk too much with tech support people because I liken 3D printing to having an automobile in 1905. You spend about 10% of the time driving and 90% of the time on the side of the road with the hood open.
It's kind of like working with a PC in the late 80s, early 90s as well, where you spent most of your time using it trying to edit an autoexec.bat file to get just a little bit more memory.
Yep, and cram your mouse driver and higher DOS memory, and it was like a wizardry science.
Yeah, it's true. PCs were the maker community back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it used to go to PC like swap meets and stuff.
That sounds miserable.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about that is that people today talk about how young folks in school, the teenagers, the millennials, the Generation Z, whatever label you want to use for folks under 30, are so much more tech savvy than older folks. But what I think has happened is a lot of those folks aren't as tech savvy. They don't understand all the details of technology when we talk about drivers and memory and even hard drive versus system memory, because they don't need to. The technology has become so ubiquitous that they may be more savvy about applications and about using the devices, but not necessarily understanding how they work. Kind of like when you talk about if you had a car in the early 1900s, you had to know what all those parts and pieces did. Today, you don't have to. You can just, if my car breaks, I can open the hood and look under it and go, yep, there's car stuff in there. and that is about it.
The engine, I think.
So Peter, your experience with stroke wasn't with as many of the physical challenges. So, a couple of years out now, how are you seeing your cognitive challenges and mental capability?
Yeah, as you said, my physical wasn't the real challenge. It was cognitive and emotional. I've written a few blog posts on that. It's made me. At some points, I feel like I'm just going crazy with these emotions that go all over the place. But I've got that under control now, so I'm happy about that.
And in some respects, that's kind of the definition of going crazy.
Yes. But when I first got back from the rehab hospital, I couldn't turn on the computer. I couldn't write an email. I was just so confused and befuddled by absolutely everything. And it was to the point where my wife tells me this because I can't remember it. I didn't even know my name or who the president was or what city I was in. But I'm a little better now, I would say. But, interestingly, it was cool listening to Carrie talking about 3D printing. It sounds like that was something that happened a little bit more post-stroke that you're getting involved with. And I'm now getting involved with machine learning and AI. I'm creating my own projects right now, and it's something that I didn't know anything about before. So I've taken this sort of opportunity to learn something that's always fascinated me and learn something new. And maybe I'll turn it loose on the stock market and make $1 million.
The emotional thing is pretty interesting because I kind of go up and down. Like I want to do that AI stuff, but I also feel like I have enough frustration in my life.
Well, I use my stroke to its fullest advantage, because if ever I'm getting frustrated or confused by something, sometimes I'll get a little agitated and I'll just look at my wife and go, well, what do you want from me? I've got brain damage.
Yeah, it's great to get all the positives. It seems that people are a lot nicer to you when you're in a wheelchair.
Oh, I'm sure.
And you get first in line.
Yeah, you don't have to wait for the men's room.
Yeah, that's free food, maybe. No, here, this is for you.
I'm interested in that emotional thing you're talking about, Peter, because I've been a little bit on a roller coaster with that. Like a month ago, I went into this state. You ever heard of that? I can't remember what it's called, but alien hand syndrome or something? Where people feel like their hand isn't really theirs.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know. I don't remember the name of that syndrome, but I had it right when I was out of the hospital. I had my hand underneath the pillow and I was laying and I turned my head towards my hand and I let out a scream because I didn't know whose hand it was.
Yeah, when I first had my stroke, I thought for sure someone was underneath the sheet with me because I felt the leg, but it was my own left leg.
He actually leaned over to me and said, oh, yeah, there's some guy's leg in my bed. No joke.
Oh, boy.
Part of my brain, I thought they were running out of beds or something. But because I could feel with my right leg, I felt a leg next to mine. But because I can't feel with my left leg, it was just like a one-way street. It's hard to explain.
Yeah. Oh, I completely understand what you're saying. Don't you find that it's? I call myself my own science experiment because I look how my brain works and doesn't work. I go, oh, that's interesting. I'm feeling this way or that way, or the way I'm thinking about something, or the way I'm looking at something. It's all kind of brand new because everything is so different.
Yes. Yeah, in some ways, I mean, I suffered from depression for a good chunk of my life. Went through therapy and that helped a lot, but the stroke kind of reset a lot of that too. But I was saying about the alien hand syndrome. About a month ago, I had that same thing about my own brain, which was really weird.
Do you find that happening as other things are coming back, or do you find that sort of happening as maybe you're hitting a plateau or taking a step back?
It's a good question. I feel like I've made a lot of boost in the last 6 months even. So I think it's probably being more cognitive aware of myself and inwardly focused and being able to analyze it.
If I could chime in from an observer point of view, I think that's absolutely what it is. Carrie, even the first, second, even third year, Carrie had a lack of awareness often of what he had lost or his limitations, just sort of a more general sense of acceptance, sort of like, yeah, it's good. And I think lately he's had some pretty huge jumps cognitively, as well as some physical ones. And we're 4.5 years out. I think that has brought with it a bit of baggage of understanding sort of, like he was mentioning the frustration, that all of a sudden he has a better awareness of what he could do before the stroke and what he can do now, which I think he was not having as much of for quite a while.
I think that makes a lot of sense, as some other stuff as bigger challenges become resolved or you become aware of them, you can start understanding and seeing some of the others. One example I have found is that, my shoulder and my elbow have been getting stronger. It's only within the last couple of months that I realized I can't really, I knew I couldn't rotate my wrist, but I didn't realize I couldn't really move my hand left and right at the end of my wrist. It was one of those things that, had never occurred to me. It's not that it's a new loss. It's just that, there were higher priorities in assessing my limitations. And I'm finding new limitations as there's room in my brain to understand some of these other limitations.
Mm-hmm. I found something that's been weird for me too, is that I frequently dream of doing things that I can't do anymore.
Oh, wow.
Like I'm driving a motorcycle or I'm playing golf. And those are things I used to do a lot of. And so I get kind of the pleasure of being able to do them, in my dream, but I can't physically do it. But it's surprising how often that happens.
And just to note, there was never going to be any motorcycle anyway. So that's been a long-standing discussion. I hate and fear them. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had my motorcycle license and rode a motorcycle for 2 days when I learned how to ride a motorcycle, and that was about it. So I keep telling medical professionals to keep their eyes off of my internal organs. I'm still using them. I think that's really interesting too, how dreams come into play with our brain knowing how to do some stuff when it doesn't have to deal with the physical limitations of the body or the communication. And at the same time, doing it in a very weird way. There are times when I'll have dreams where I'm just walking around or running around just like I used to. And there were other times where I've had dreams of where I've been in a wheelchair, manual wheelchair, and propelling myself around. And what's interesting about that to me is that I really only used a wheelchair in the hospital. And even then, it wasn't, without use of my left hand, it wasn't like I could actually propel it anyway.
Exactly.
So for some reason, my brain has decided that we're going to give you, in your dreams, we're going to give you 2 functional hands and arms, but no functional legs. It's like, okay.
It's kind of rude.
Yeah. So, Malia, how have you seen Carrie's then cognitive approach change over the last several years?
Oh, it's night and day. I do wish. I always say I wish that somebody could have told my 9-month out from stroke person what it was like today. Back then, he wasn't involved in decisions. He pretty much did a lot of sleeping, was sort of checked out, not very connected. And like he said, if he got on the computer for any amount of time, he could, barely type in an email, and that would be it mentally. That would be what he could do for the day. Even watching a TV show, he could watch. Oh, there they are. He could watch a little bit of a show, and he would sort of lose focus. And now.
Or lately, I've been at that fine point of knowing that if I stop challenging myself, that's bad. But I also don't want any more frustration.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, but I'll come in now, and he'll have been in the computer for 5 hours, and I have to say to him, "Don't forget, the guys are coming over tonight to play games. You need to save some mental power." He can just go forever now. So the difference is really dramatic, and I do wish there were more people who were just coming home that could know how dramatic it can be. And even this far out, we're still seeing major changes.
Oh, Malia, you're so right. It's just we have a group that we go to, and we've seen people who were in a wheelchair and now walk with just a cane, and people who couldn't literally put two words together now speaking to the group. The progress doesn't just stop when you first get out of the hospital. It really is this long, continuing path.
And, I can say when I empathize with the caretaker kind of who goes through it, I remember looking at Peter when he was in a coma, and I thought, oh my God, will he ever talk again? Ours was like yours, Malia. It was pretty traumatic. It was like it happened suddenly. And Peter went off to work. Hello. Then I got a call. I'm in the emergency room. He hung up. I didn't know where he was. I had to find him. And then it turns out it was supposed to be a minor. Well, first of all, you don't think it's going to be brain surgery. I thought he broke his ankle. He was coming home, whatever. And they were like, but don't worry about it. It'll just be a few weeks. But then it went from bad to worse. And then it was like catastrophic. And then they said he's probably going to die, or he'll spend the rest of his life in a coma. And it's at that time, that shock that sets in of, okay, yeah, and you're taking a breath. And I remember just wondering if he'd ever know his name, say his name, talk again. So when I see how far he's come, we call him a miracle. He really is, and it's always changing and growing. And I think that's the wonderful part of it too. And God, Carrie, you're such an inspiration. Yeah. You really are. Just a little side note, Peter likes 3D printing. Really fascinated when you were talking about that. He's like, oh my God.
Yeah, I do think I remember saying to a nurse at some point, like, is this as good as it gets? Like, what do I expect? And nobody can tell you. It's just sort of this, they kind of look at you blankly. I actually had a nurse that said to me, well, wherever he is at 6 months, that's as far as he'll get.
Oh, that is so terrible.
I know, right?
And I think that's really interesting. That should almost be criminal, those statements. That folks make at this point, because, I see folks, 5 years out, 10 years out, 15 years out, still making improvements and growing, and it happens. And, the belief that it can happen is so important to making it happen.
It's so true. You have to keep your eye open for the improvements, and you'll see them. If you're in a negative state of mind, which is like Carrie, I had depression before my stroke as well. And, if you're looking for more deficits or more problems, you're going to find them. But the contrary is also true. If I'm keeping my eye open for, oh, wow, I did that better than I did that last week, and Rhea, she's the one who taught me all that sort of, positive thinking thing. And she'll remind me all the time. She'll go, do you realize that you couldn't do that last week? Or, when you got back from the hospital?
Rhea does that with me all the time too.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
What I thought was, if I were to pass along a tip, what I thought was helpful for Peter in the hospital, I knew, of course, he was in the coma, but I had this sense that there was an awareness. And so I made sure that there was good music playing, pleasant music. When people would call, I would say, talk to Peter as if you would if he wasn't in a coma. Ask him to do things like you would, hey, Peter, how's it going? That kind of thing. Because I wanted to keep like a good energy in the room and around him, because I sensed that, and if the doctors had something negative to say, I'd say, get out. We'll take this out into the hall. And I think that's important too, because we really don't know. And when they would say, sometimes the doctors would say, well, it's this and that. And I'd say, but it's an individual. It's like a thumbprint. Do you really know?
No, they do not.
They do not know. And I made them say that, and then I made them say it out loud. So I said, no, say that louder so he can hear you.
The whole thing is, it's like they seem to be very, very worried about giving false hope. But if you think about it, that is a risk. But what a much bigger risk to impose limits that aren't necessarily there. So a lot of times when I write my blog articles, I'm always sort of like self-censoring because I don't want people to think, that everything's going to get better. But at the same time, you can't promise that, of course, but things do get better. That statement is true. Not everything. Things get better.
And better is relative. Better is so relative, and their definition may not be what yours is. So.
That's just exactly what I was going to say. And everybody his heart was totally in the right place. And I think part of it is that this just happened in September, so it's not even, 2 years ago. And I think that when I look back at this, we don't really know that much about the brain. I mean, we know more about, I'm just making this up because I'm not technical either, 3D printers and computers. Yep. We just don't have that much knowledge. We go to other planets and we're planning all this stuff. So I think we're catching up. But so you really, can't say, I don't know.
Yeah, you can't say with full confidence.
With full confidence.
Our Carrie's neurologist actually said that to me. He said every brain is different and every recovery is different. And he said, this is in one of my posts, but I remember he came in and everybody was just saying, the end of the world. He's going to be in a home the rest of his life. He'll never talk to you. And he said, look, recovery is 0 to 100, and your husband will be somewhere in there, and nobody knows. And anybody who tells you that they know isn't telling you the truth. Take it every day, keep moving forward, and then that's all you can do at this point. And I just thought that was the best advice I could get. And I've repeated that to so many people whose loved ones have had strokes, that there's no milestones. You just have to keep moving, and we just don't know.
That's so smart of you. You heard it and you realized it was something to hold on to, because it really helps move you forward. I mean, if you're not moving forward, you're going to be moving backward.
Well, I also called all the doctors' names, so that helped me too. So
I remember 2 nurses separately kind of chiding me about my being upbeat in the hospital.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why wouldn't I be?
Yeah.
And they would say things like, well, you may never walk again or, move your arm. Tell me these reasons why I should be downbeat. It was surprising. And maybe they were just trying to not make sure I wasn't getting my hopes too high for a fall. But I remember at the time it had more of a negative impact than a positive one.
Oh, yes.
I don't think there's any value to taking away hope. I don't see where that could possibly be.
There's no value.
Right. One of the things I like to encourage newer survivors to do and caregivers is to just take a lot of pictures and a lot of notes. Because, when you talk about not being able to see your progress, when you look back a year ago at where you were, or 2 years ago, when you have those pictures, when you have those Facebook memories that come up, whatever it is, it's right there. And it's so easy to take pictures and videos these days with our phones and with the other devices we have that just makes it so much more obvious, how far we have come when we just can't see it on a day-to-day basis.
We actually did a video. So I took video first it was photos, and then we did video as Carrie was beginning to walk and as he went through the process. And, he couldn't remember any of it hard. Like you were saying, he remembers it, but in a very abstract way. And to watch himself improve, I think, was startling for him. I think he had no idea how far he had come. And for other people too. I think it's good for other people to have an idea of, when they see him, what this actually means compared to where he was and so on.
Right.
Yeah, that video has been pretty inspirational for us.
Yeah, it was fantastic to see it. That remember people that worked with me that I liked, and then to see how much support I had was great.
And one of the things, too, when there are therapists that you have liked or that you liked working with, when you can go ahead and, share via email some of those videos of today or photos of today, and, that just lights up their day when they can see their graduates doing so much better now.
We actually did, so Carrie calls it his stroke anniversary. So on the 1 year stroke anniversary, we got plates of cookies and followed his path on that first day of his recovery. So we went to the fire station, and they're the ones who, responded and had a plate of cookies, and we had a note from us and sort of saying where he was been, what the expectations were, and where he was now. And then we drove into the emergency room and delivered cookies, and then downtown to where he first was in rehab, and so on forth. And we got to see a lot of the people who we hadn't seen in a year. And there was a lot of they couldn't believe how far he would come and how much hair he had, because he had his head got shaved. And so we did the whole route. It was a whole day. Went to every place that he had been, and he got to see people who he had sort of vague memories of. And we left this sort of note for everybody. And then the second year, his second stroke anniversary, we just thanked and sort of reached out to everybody in the community who had helped us. And we try to each year on the stroke anniversary do something that sort of says, look how far we've come, and thank you so much for everything. And that means a lot to us, and it's been pretty great.
It meant a lot to them too.
Yeah.
Like to them, they, some would come in and they would have some connection with, and then they would just disappear. And they don't know how they ended up or anything. So they really appreciated us coming back and checking in with them.
Yeah, I think back with such gratitude to the therapist and the doctors who first treated me, and because I wasn't even there, I didn't remember any of it. But I think number one with these therapists, to a person, I mean, they're just they don't do it for the money; they do it for some sort of calling, and they're usually such giving kind of people, and they really help you move ahead. It's wonderful to have those support people. I mean, they're special kind of people.
Yeah. How long were you in the hospital?
Just speaking of memory, I don't know. I put everything together, and I think so. I was in the coma for a few weeks.
A few weeks in the coma, and then a month in a rehabilitation center, a hospital.
Carrie ended up being in 5 months in the hospital. So.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had a lot of people to thank.
Did they have to do an emergency craniotomy or anything?
Yeah, he had a craniotomy and then a second bleed and a second operation.
So you've been through it, Carrie.
Yeah.
It was actually funny when he was talking to his doctor as they were getting ready to put the cranium back on. 3D printing came up because he had done it some before the stroke also. And he asked if he could 3D print his body.
So cool.
Wanted to put little forms on it that would stick out.
My fake skull, and I go, I've got like this super composite material right here in my head.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't buy it.
You never know when you'll need a spare.
That's right.
So Ria, Peter's been talking about his experience with getting a hold of his emotions and the progress on his cognitive abilities. What have you observed since his waking up and to get to today over the last, year and a half, almost 2 years?
Well, it's like day and night, really. And I think when I'm like feeling back on it, he has come so far, especially as far down as he was, like, knowing his name, knowing the date. And it was sort of step by step. And the challenge with all of this is, since there really is no formula recipe that follows, you're really taking it one day at a time. And sometimes, even 1 hour at a time. And there were sometimes, I'm sure other caretakers, I think we have to try to take good care of ourselves, because I know it was almost a year into it when I began to, I think, suffer a little bit of the post-traumatic syndrome, where I'd look down at something and then I would actually have a minute to feel my feelings and where I'd come. But Peter, I say, is truly a miracle. So going back then, it was, okay, finally he knew his name. Then we got him home, and I listened to Malia's podcast. And it was sort of the same thing. Once we got home, I didn't have any nursing or any help, and Peter didn't have his skull. Half of his skull was gone. I had to go find the skull. They were like, "Where'd the skull go?" Because he went out of our system because he had to go to the emergency room. And so there was always that danger, like, will something happen? And then, we finally got that. You know what I mean? You know how that goes. And then you get home and it's like, okay, you have to learn all these other things. What is safe? What is not safe? And then I wondered, finally he was kind of able to walk, and we would walk our little Yorkie. Would he ever remember where we lived? And it was really small steps, because he got home on October 31st. And then he got his, cranioplasty, where he had the skull, in March. And it was just at that point that he started to know name, date, but he'd still kind of shuffle. He had a wheelchair that he would push right past the door. And I would say, gosh, will he ever remember where we live? And then it seemed to pick up. Over time, though, it wasn't just like, one day, then just new things would happen. He'd be able to write a little bit of an email, figure something else out. And then he would get frustrated, which I think is normal. He'd be like, oh God, I don't remember. I used to be able to do this. And I would say, calm down, let it happen. It's going to happen. And, yelling at is not going to help. But I've seen so much improvement, and I think it just really does continue. A lot is still, we're still in the process. But what a shocking, it is traumatic, when you're looking back, especially if you're sort of on the outside and not the person in it. And I have such compassion for him too, because it's traumatic for for the loved one or whomever is going through it.
So, Malia and Carrie, Peter and Rhea are now roughly where you were 3 years ago. So how would you describe what they have to look forward to over the next 3 years?
Well, it feels in many ways returning to normalcy. It's less about what you can't do and more about doing the things you can.
Oh, that's great.
I love that.
I love that.
Yeah, I'll second that. I think I can remember just that we have a teenager, and she was 11 at the time. And just that fear of, how as a family are we going to survive, and what are we going to be able to do, and will we ever vacation again? And those first years are just, there's so many obstacles, and then you start knocking them down, and then all of a sudden you're just living, and you're having people to your house for barbecues, and you're traveling to Las Vegas, and there's just all of a sudden you realize that there really isn't much you can't do. You have to restructure, you have to rethink things, but that you do reach a new normal, and it's not like, a new normal that's just kind of but it's actually a good new normal, one that works.
Oh, you're so right. We're much closer as a couple now.
Yeah.
I am far more thoughtful and kind in my approach to just life in general. I used to be kind of a real difficult kind of person, and now I feel like every day's a gift. So I better be nice.
Yeah, I've seen that in Carrie. There's been some dramatic changes in sort of the way he sees the world. He just sort of, he's more happy to be here, and more sort of, what's next attitude. Sort of, I've always sort of been a little bit more of the optimist in the family, and I would say that we've gotten a little bit more equal footing of late. So, yeah, no, it's nice. It's great, and we're definitely much closer and much happier and sort of settled, I would say.
That's really nice.
It is
interesting.
I hear that, it's something you don't expect. I know, a lot of folks this doesn't happen to, but many of the survivors that I talk to end up becoming more optimistic or having a more positive outview on life. And if you haven't been through something like this, it's hard to imagine that happening, but it does.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, when I came out the optometrist was looking at my eyes, and they said, "Well, you're 50% blind, and on your left, your left side's gone." And I came out of there, and we walked downstairs. I remember this, and I was just like tears started rolling down my face, and I was like, "I'm damaged goods. I'm no good anymore." And to think about that today, I could never say anything so mean or so sort of judgmental. Now I'm a new person because I'm really so grateful for all that I have now.
Yes, and one of the things that's interesting for me that's developed is, for Carrie and I, because he was so long in rehab and sort of putting things back together, that he really didn't see a lot of the improvements in the beginning. So for a long time, I would say, I know that this doesn't seem like much, but you couldn't find A on the keyboard and now you're typing email. So I think there is, perspective too. He's actually caught up to me, but for a long time, I sort of felt like it was my job to remind him that he's really doing a pretty amazing and has come so far.
Oh God, as a stroke survivor, I say thank you. It's like to know that there are people like you and Rhea is just so, it just lifts my heart up. I sometimes think I forget what it was. It was just a couple of weeks ago and I was upset about something and I just sort of was like, where would I be if you weren't here? I mean, you are the reason I am where I am. And thank you so much. And thank you, Malia, that, because we've been to some groups where people are like, oh, well, that's when my wife said, I'm out of here. I didn't sign up for this. And that actually happens. Yeah. So it's so beautiful to know that there's people like you and Rhea around who really are the positive light and the patient one. I mean, you guys didn't sign up for this, but I think so much.
Aww.
Well, I will say that I don't know that patient is always my... I like to pretend so, but I feel like Rita might be a little bit better at that than me.
Well, I think being grateful is so important. And an attitude of gratitude. I think that's what got us through it. And I say too, a sense of humor. You have to keep the sense of humor. I kept that in the hospital a lot. I would sort of, when the doctors would come in, I kind of tell a little joke and did it work? Yeah. And they'd be like, haha, or something like that. But
you were practicing your stand-up.
Yeah. But that and gratitude and a sense of humor, because you know what? Life goes on. And when we were doing our last stroke podcast with Bill, some of the things we talked about, it occurred to me, I said, this could apply to anyone, whether they have had a stroke or not, gratitude, thankful, sense of humor, positive attitude. So I think it's really important to keep those close to our hearts.
Well, I think that's one of those things, too, where ultimately once we start talking about recovery, where really the stroke itself, that's done. That's history. What we're doing is we're relearning things and we're reconnecting things in the same way that we did as, toddlers and infants before the stroke. It's that same thing. It's just happening maybe a little more slowly now and maybe in a way that's not as optimized as it was back then. But we're learning. We're rebuilding those connections. And the same principles that, applied then apply now. And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep it in mind, just as you phrased it, we're rebuilding something. It's not like you're getting back what you had. You're starting from scratch, and there's an opportunity to make it even better. And you couldn't imagine being harsh on a little toddler because it's not walking right. Oh, you fell down again. You're not learning to walk. Do you know what I mean? So if you keep that sort of sense of kindness toward yourself and your own recovery as you would to a little kid trying to learn something, it really goes a lot further and it's a lot less painful that way.
I was at the airport one day, and this woman had her little toddler sort of running around, and the kid would run like 5 steps and then bam, fall straight to the floor. And then get up and keep trying again and keep doing it. And the kid was just bouncing. I wasn't getting hurt or anything. And I'm just looking at him. I'm like, dude, I feel you, bro.
No, I think that's good. I think often it doesn't really get lost. I know that Carrie often forgets how much he's accomplished and how far he's come and how far he's still going to go. And I think that's, it can be so frustrating in the moment. But if you pull back and just realize, oh my gosh, you are 3D printing, then it sort of changes everything.
Amen. I agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's what's another great thing about having a good partner is someone who can give you that third base call about how well you're doing.
Yes.
The other thing is that you find a partner and you decide you want to get married and stuff. And you're in love with them and everything, but you really don't know what it's going to be like when, as they say, the chips are down and what that person is going to be capable of doing. And every day I'm amazed at Malia.
You're a very lucky man, Bill. Bill, sorry, Malia. Sorry about that. Here, I'm going to call you.
Bill's probably lucky.
I'll call you Rhea in a minute.
You're a good man, Rhea.
Yeah, Kathy and I aren't even married, so it would have been that much easier for her to just pack it up and head out, and she didn't. So
Carrie's PT actually said, does we still see him, even 4.5 years out, and it's his neuro PT at outpatient. And the last session we were in, he said, I didn't want to say anything to you guys sort of early on, but most couples I see don't survive this, and you should really be proud of yourselves.
So, you should. Yes.
I think we all should.
Awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we've seen. And sometimes in our group, you'll see people, they're just so kind of alone and, lost. And it's because it's difficult. It's hard. It's hard, as you know, it's hard on the marriage. It's hard on the children. It's relatives, it's just so, can be so devastating on so many fronts, not just one. It's just, it hits every place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just as a husband and a father, I remember just the other day, we were out somewhere and they were pushing me around in my wheelchair. And I said to Casey, my daughter, I said, when you're older, can you try to remember me playing catch and basketball with you rather than being in a wheelchair?
Oh.
And she said, yeah.
She does. We had a very poignant moment in the hospital. Carrie was just becoming sort of aware, but still, very blurry. And we'd all been hanging out in the room, and Casey had a Nerf ball, and sort of playing catch with him, although Carrie's vision was shot, so that was sort of a odd catch game. And then he took a pause and threw the Nerf ball at me, and it bounced off my head, and it was very, and it was sort of our first sort of fun, jovial day. And we were walking back out to the garage after, my daughter and I, and she turned to me and she said, I don't care if Daddy can never play basketball with me again. As long as he's Daddy and he's funny, that's all that matters. So, yeah, it was a pretty good little moment.
That's really wonderful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, Peter and Rhea, we're at about 1.5 years now, coming up on the 2-year mark this fall. Where do you go from here? What do you see the next years looking like for you in recovery and in life?
You know what, Bill? It's one day at a time.
You took the words
really
right out of my mouth.
It really is. It really is. And keeping that attitude of gratitude, and, we're really rebuilding our life, as I'm sure Malia and Carrie, and it's the one day at a time, and then let it unfold to the next. I'm seeing wonderful things, visualizing all that is, forward moving, life affirming, all the things that are good. Is there an exact map? Am I a fortune teller? I could pretend, but but no, you know what I'm saying? So I would say that's a good approach.
Yeah. I'd even go so far as to say that actually, if I were thinking a lot about, well, where am I going to be in 5 years? I think I would probably kill myself. It's too far off, and there's just still a lot of challenges left and everything. And it would make me just so sad. But when I come more into the moment and just like Rhea said, one day at a time kind of thing, that's actually a new place for me to live, and it's serving me really well.
I think Martin Luther King, didn't he say, just keep taking the steps on the staircase, just one step at a time?
That could very well be. I'll go ahead and fact check that one.
Just take the first step. I think that's what he said.
So, I'm just jumping in here in post-production The quote that Malia is thinking of from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is, "Take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step." And now back to our conversation. So, Malia and Carrie, do you have the same approach, or how do you see the next few years unfolding for you?
Hey, Carrie, am I a planner at all?
Yeah, Malia is the planner.
I have the next 15 years mapped out.
A project manager.
I am. I'm a problem solver. It's just who I am. So I'm always looking for the next thing and what do we want to do? For a long time, I was getting ready to move us into a tiny house. And then we moved into an apartment temporarily while we had some construction done and crossed that off the list. We won't be living in a tiny house.
We watch YouTubes about tiny houses all the time.
I know. I got totally sucked in, and no, we're not doing that.
A friend of mine just did that for like 3 years or 2 years, and she's done.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
She had to step outside.
Little things like we just found the VWs has come out with their van, and it's going to be hybrid, and so it'd be great for people who are disabled because you can swivel the chair around and face the back and eat in the van, and yet it's still hybrid and it'd be kind of fun. So we're always looking at things like that on the horizon. And
that's cool.
Our daughter's got like 3 years left in high school, and so she'll be off to college. So then it's about, how do we visit her? How do we get to her? What do we want to do for the next stage? So yes, and we are always, and we're looking at Vancouver. Who knows, one day. So. Yeah, we're big on the planning and moving forward, and I think being 4.5 years out, you sort of get to a place where you know what you were about, and what you can do, and what your limits are, which aren't many, but what they are, and what makes you happy.
Awesome. Well, this has been an absolute delight. So, thank you to everyone for joining us this week. You'll find links to Malia and Peter's articles over at strokecast.com.
Thanks so much, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
So nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
It was nice talking to you guys.
I was wondering how that conversation would go and what we would talk about with getting everyone together at once. Ultimately, I didn't really need to worry. The conversation just flows. And that often happens when you get survivors and caregivers together. We all just get it, just like you probably get it too. There's tremendous value in connecting with other folks in our stroke club. You see that when caregivers get together. You see that when survivors get together. And I'd like to think you get some of that value by listening to this show. Another thing that we touch on that I want to call attention to is the idea that as we recover, we discover new deficits. As I mentioned in the conversation, I've recently discovered I don't really have ulnar or radial deviation. In other words, I can't move my wrist left or right. It's not that I've lost any capability, just the opposite, in fact. As I've recovered bigger things and just other aspects of my arm, I've started to discover things that previously just flew under the radar. This is a good thing. It marks a point of recovery in some things, and it highlights some of the other things that I can work on to get even more function back as I go forward. We also got into a conversation about hobbies, 3D printing and older computer challenges from the 90s in particular. As we started to go into that rabbit hole, and to be merciful to you, I did cut some of that out. It wasn't so much about stroke or disability, just about the stuff that we're interested in. And that's important because while it does have an impact on our lives are still so much more than just stroke survival. I don't talk too much about the rest of my life on the show because, well, the show is specifically about Stroke World, but it's so important for survivors to get involved in other things they are interested in. And the added benefit is that a hobby can aid in recovery. Just look at Carrie's experience with 3D printing and how it's driving him to connect with other folks. And for caregivers, too, it's important. Caregivers must still be able to have their own life and their own hobbies. Their entire life can't be centered around taking care of us or, they're going to burn out. And it's not going to be good for them, and it's not going to be good for us, and it's not going to be good for the rest of our families and communities. If you can't imagine doing stuff after a stroke, go ahead and talk to your occupational therapist, your OT, or talk to the recreational therapists. Talk to other survivors and caregivers and get ideas about how you can pursue your hobbies and the other things that you're passionate about. There are an amazing number of unexpected solutions out there that can work around a whole variety of deficits. So look for those opportunities to connect and to grow. And that brings us to our hack of the week. Stand off center while doing dishes. You see, when I do dishes, I tend to make a huge mess. So one of the reasons why my girlfriend will occasionally just stop me from doing dishes and just want to take over herself. I tend to get water on the counter and water on the floor, and I figure, it'll dry. And, granted, that happened before the stroke, too. But it happens even more now. And I splash myself more as I do this one-handed, which means I then have to go and change or spend a few hours damp. You see, I'm used to standing in front of the faucet, centered on the sink, basically sort of my belly button in a line with the faucet. And that's how the vast majority of folks do the dishes, or really do anything at the sink. But really, that's a legacy of the days when I used to do dishes with two hands, and both hands had to have access to the sink. You see, I recently realized that I don't have to do that anymore. You see, now when I do dishes, I stand just a step to the left. That means my right, unaffected arm and shoulder are now centered on the faucet. The one working hand has full access to the sink. The weaker left hand is out of the way because it doesn't need access to those dishes. And as a result, I don't splash my clothes nearly as much anymore. I'm also getting less water on the floor and on the counter. You see, part of living with disabilities is figuring out what I used to do to accommodate the fact that I had two hands, and that I no longer need to do it in that same way. It's about giving me an opportunity to rethink the tasks I spent 46 years doing, to come up with new ways to do them as I go forward and as my function gradually returns. So I hope that's a helpful perspective. There's lots of things that we do that we can now go ahead and rethink. In a program note, I had the privilege of being the first guy to go ahead and appear on the Trina Talks podcast. Trina Talks is a podcast with inspirational talk based on wisdom gained through Trina's life experiences for women who want motivation and inspiration to go to the next level in their lives, whether personal or professional. Trina L. Martin is a motivational speaker, leader, and cyber tech expert. I share my story and journey as we talk about the challenges, signs, and causes of stroke, and some of the specific challenges that women face when it comes to stroke. You can listen at strokegas.com/Trina Talks or subscribe to Trina Talks for free in your favorite podcast app. And on a personal note, as I mentioned in the introduction, I am recording this bit on the morning of June 3rd, 2019. That makes today my second birthday, my 2-year stroke anniversary. I'll be talking about that in greater detail in the next episode. But for now, I'll just want to say that I am grateful for all the support I've gotten over the past 2 years, for the progress that I've made, and for the future that is yet to come. So, what is your takeaway from this conversation with Peter and Ria and Malia and Carrie? Let us know in the comments over at strokecast.com/wherearewenow or in the new Strokecast Facebook group at strokecast.com/Facebook group. You can also connect with us over on Instagram now. Just go to strokecast.com/Instagram or search Instagram for Bills_Strokecast. Share this episode with 3 other people in your circle by giving them the link, strokecast.com/wherearewenow. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.